Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeff Harrell, and I'll be the host and a presenter for today's webinar, Actionable Intelligence, a Threat Intelligence Buyer's Guide. Before we begin, I'd like to cover some basics and logistics. Today's webinar will be approximately 45 minutes, including a question and answer segment. For the Q&A, please use the questions button at the top part of the BrightTalk interface to submit your question. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. If your question is not answered, please feel free to email us your question at the email address at the end of the presentation. We'd also appreciate it if you provide a rating and any feedback you might have on the content of this webinar, which you can do by clicking the ratings button. If you think this webinar would be of interest to your colleagues, please use the Share This button to invite them to view the recorded version, which will be available within a few minutes after the conclusion of the webinar. Today's webinar features Rick Holland, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, where he serves security and risk professionals. Rick works with senior information security leadership, providing strategic guidance on security architecture, security operations, and data privacy. His research focuses on incident response, threat intelligence, and email and web content security, as well as virtualization security. He's regularly quoted in the media and is a frequent guest lecturer at the University of Texas at Dallas. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Rick to get us started. Rick?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I know, especially on a day when we were having vulnerabilities in Bash, setting aside some time with us is no small feat, so I am appreciative of that. To get started with, I thought I would just point out the obvious here. It's football season. Now, I'm in Dallas, as the comment Jeff made about me guest lecturing at UT Dallas, and I'm sadly a Cowboys fan. And despite the fact that the Cowboys won last week in a comeback, we expect failure for them. In fact, a lot of webcast people will talk about you're doing it wrong, and they use Maginot Line analogies and things like that we've heard over and over. For me, the you're doing it wrong analogy is Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones. Nothing changes you don't want to be the Jerry Jones with your cybersecurity program. But to kind of move along, right, it's also budget season. So it's fall football season and it's budget season. Right now, budget calls, probably for the past month or so, have been one of the top inquiry types that I'm getting from my customers. Customers are working on their 2015 budgets, and they're also trying to triage, what may get pushed to their 2016 budget. And one of the top questions that's coming up in these inquiries with customers is what do we do about threat intelligence? We're hearing threat intelligence left and right. What do we do about it? We keep hearing actionable intelligence. Now, you may have seen this. I almost did not include it in the slide, but it's still very valid. I did a blog before RSA earlier in the year in February about Terry Tate, office linebacker, and actual intelligence. And then anytime you heard someone on the RSA floor say actual intelligence, Terry Tate would go and tackle them. If you haven't seen that Super Bowl commercial, it was a Reebok one. It's probably one of the best, my favorite commercials out there. But you're hearing actual intelligence all over the place. If you went to Black Hat, we also are seeing it there. It's just continuing and continuing. And customers are really trying to understand what this means, how they can use it, and how much money they should try to invest in it with their limited resources. And so what I have done, this comes from a piece of research. It's built on the blog, but I actually then expanded that in July and did some research digging into it on the characteristics of actual intelligence. Now, there's a lot on this slide. We're actually not going to walk through this. We're going to step through these characteristics as we continue through this, but this could be helpful for something to look back at later. Now, I'm a former Army Intel guy, and so a lot of times I have a proclivity to use a lot of Army stuff or talk about some Army things. And what I did here is I used one of the Army field manuals on intelligence, FM2-0, which is referenced there, and you could take a look at this. And there's actually probably 11 or 12 characteristics that field manual uses to talk about actual intelligence. And what I basically did is I picked out the ones that I thought were most relevant to enterprise defenders, and then I put some context around them as far as what we're doing in our world. So, like I said, we're going to walk through these, but there's some detail here that I probably won't cover. It might be useful to take a look at. At a high level, it's accuracy, alignment, integration. Is it predictive? Is it relevant? Is it tailored? Is it timely? And we're going to step through these in a little bit more detail. The first one up is accuracy. As you can see here, this is not a very good shot group. This is not the type of accuracy that you want in an Intel service. And a little bit of background as well. I just finished 2 weeks ago almost 30 hours of research interviews with vendors. I'm working on a market overview on threat intelligence, where it's actually going to be a two-part research. The first part is going to be the threat intelligence providers and all the different people that provide you services, and then there's going to be the platforms that are used for analysis. One of the things from the providers that I really struggle with differentiating is accuracy. Everyone says we have great intelligence. You know, it was a common story. It's difficult to validate as an analyst. It's difficult to validate as a prospect, as a buyer. So I've got some questions, and these are the questions that I actually ask the vendors when I'm having briefings or learning about a new one. You know, can you do a proof of concept? Whatever your intelligence product is, be it something that's tactical or operational up to strategic, can we get a proof of concept of it? The other piece that I think is important, especially because many providers are new in this space as it's emerging, is can you give me references? And I think one thing to add on the references, can you give me references from my vertical? Someone may have the greatest intelligence of the world, but it may not be appropriate for what you're doing in your organization. Perhaps it's specific to one vertical and you're in a different vertical. There is some global overlap, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Another question I ask is about OEM relationships, or who is reselling or integrating that intelligence into another product. That's also a good indicator because there are so many different players in the intelligence space, and there's really not one company that you can go to provide all of your needs. And this is what my research, I'm giving you a preview of my research. It's a good idea to find out who they're partnering with, because these are the ones that have something of value that these vendors see value in, so it could be valuable for you as well. One of the other things is to have an understanding of how they're coming up with this accurate intelligence. You know, understand their processing and analytics capabilities. On one of my recent calls, I had someone tell me that their intelligence was accurate because of big data and stuff. Now, I don't know if anyone was at Black Hat and saw Alex Pinto's presentation that was called roughly Secure Because Math. It reminded me of that. Actually, Alex and Kyle Maxwell from VeriSign, they actually did a presentation at DEF CON on measuring the IQ of your threat intelligence feeds. The video is actually available on Iron Geek site. Could give you some, a framework that you could use to actually measure the accuracy of intelligence providers that are out there. So accuracy is important. Don't take the vendor's word for it. Don't take an analyst's word for it. Don't take an SE's word for it. Talk to peers, test it out in your environment, and see how accurate it is for you. The next one up is alignment. And this is a really important one as well. All of them are going to be important. But the vendor questions I have here is, and this could be getting ahead. Something else that I'm working on is a maturity model for threat intelligence operations, as well as incident response. And the first thing I have here is asking the vendors what their intelligence requirements are. You know, basically the vendors that are providing these services have a list, or should have a list, of things that they want to answer and that they want to provide to you, either for you to be able to do prevention on, or for you to be able to just have visibility and then go hunt with. So ask the vendors, how do they understand and come up with what they're going to collect on? And then the follow-up question, does it align with you? Now, if you were to look at a capabilities maturity model, you know, from a 0 to a 5, you know, organizations that have intelligence requirements, it's probably maybe the high 3s to 4s and up, right? Many organizations don't have intelligence requirements. It comes out of the military intelligence community, tradecraft. You might call it priority intelligence requirements. You know, I like to tell people not to use too much military lingo. You know, what's important to your business? What questions do you need answered? And how does a vendor align to help you answer those questions? So if you're concerned about attacks against industrial control systems, what are they doing to collect information on people that are doing that? Maybe it has something to do with the Havex malware that's recently come out. Well, not recently. It's come back up again. The other piece is, how does the provider work with you? I think this is important as well, right? It shouldn't be a one-and-done type of deal. You know, there's multiple ways that a vendor can align with you. One is RFIs, requests for information. So do you have the ability to go out and query, work with the vendor and say, hey, I need an answer on this. Can they go out and tell you what they know about it? Sometimes these are manual processes. Sometimes there's portals where you can do this. that will be important. But there needs to be some type of feedback loop so that you can provide information to the vendor and say, hey, look, this isn't helping us out. What can we tweak here? And then that might actually result in a vendor changing some of their intelligence requirements, which would then change, how they're collecting information that ultimately becomes intelligence. Next one up is if you've seen webinars that I've done in the past, I've been using this slide for, I don't know, it's probably a year and a half old now. This is my high-level summary of what operationalization of threat intelligence is, and it's really kind of three parts. The first part on the left is the ingestion. So you see all your different sources here. These sources range from commercial, open source, B2B sharing arrangements, and then you have an analyst in the middle who's overwhelmed, trying to make sense of all of these alerts. And then on the right, and this is the important part, and that's what we're moving to next, is integrated, is the integration of the threat intelligence. The analogy that I always use here, if we go back to 9/11, the CIA had information on terrorists that were in flight schools. They did not pass that actionable intelligence on to the FBI so that they could investigate it. So they had good information, but it wasn't integrated into law enforcement, therefore they couldn't act on it. Now, that's not to say they would have been able to stop an attack, perhaps not, but it definitely, there was a piece falling down there on the integration side. And that is a really, really big problem in the space right now. You have some vendors, going back to the market overview I'm working at, you have some vendors that are focusing on one of these three silos. Others are working on them all. But the integration is, you could have the best ingestion, you could have the best analysis. If you can't get it out into controls, you're wasting your money. So on the integration front, there's a couple different scenarios that I think are important. There's almost two broad use cases that you'll see. One is the one percenters. I like Sons of Anarchy, so I always use the one percenter analogy, and we're, 2 episodes into Sons of Anarchy so far this year. The one percenters, they can do whatever they want. In this case, these are the big tech companies. These are the defense industrial base. This is very large financial services that have lots and lots of resources. They have the ability to integrate, to work with APIs. They're software development shops. They have scripting capability. I almost said bash, which is definitely a component there. Could be bad. But anyway, so you want to be able to cater towards the one percenters, but then there's everybody else out there, and 99%. In reality, it's probably more like 10 percenters and 90%. I'm seeing oil and gas, pharma, healthcare kind of moving up into that 10%. Maybe not all the way there yet. Trying to move from maybe a 1 on a maturity scale to a 3, something along those lines. And they may have some use for the APIs as well. But the other piece of it is so that the vendors can work with other vendors. How easy is it for a vendor to integrate their intelligence product, whatever it is, with another solution, right? Integration's key. We are sick and tired of silos and only being able to apply intelligence to one particular vertical or one particular vendor's offerings, right? So we want to break those down. So it's important to ask vendors about their integrations and what they have there. One that I think is what's coming up more is the Splunk side. Now, I'm taking calls on incident response, security operations, and one of the big trends that I see is that Splunk is popping up more and more and more as the orchestration point for a lot of my customers. Now, Splunk can be expensive. There's a certain amount of work up front that needs to be done on some of the analytics, but the Splunk App Store is really popular. And today, a lot of the integrations into the Splunk App Store are more detective and reporting in nature, but they're going to be moving more and more to where the Splunk app integration will actually do some prevention and blocking for you to talk to whatever that firewall is or whatever the use case is. The analogy I use about SIM or analytics is, and I say this as someone that used to use Splunk as a sales engineer that sold Envision, QRadar, ArcSight, Splunk as well. SIMs largely are like driving a car while trying to look through the rearview mirror, which is pretty tough, at night with your lights off. It doesn't help you with anything down the road, generally speaking. It's good for looking back. Now, some of this is starting to change as organizations are putting a lot of resources into Splunk. We're in transition. We're in a really painful transition from SIM to security analytics. But just one thing I would ask is what kind of integrations do they have into analytics platforms, and then from the analytics platform, can you get out and maybe do the integration there? There's multiple places to do the integration. So this is really hot. From a marketing perspective on the APIs, the vendors are talking about this left and right. Everyone is. One of the litmus tests I use, now I'm not a developer. It's, evaluating a RESTful API for me is not something that I really have a skill set to do. I work with some of my colleagues on that have more of an application background than I do. But I'll just ask them, can you provide me documentation of your API, or can you explain your API to me? And if it takes a long time or they're stuttering, this is kludgy. Maybe it's a professional services engagement to make something work. It's a litmus test for me, and documentation is seemed to be, at least at the first level, those that have documentation, they're ready. They've had to provide that for the integrations that they have. So it's a good thing to ask. And then, of course, if you have the ability or your team has the ability to evaluate that, all the better. All right, so what's next? So next up is relevancy. This is one of the graphics that I have from this latest report on Actionable Intelligence as well. And I kind of group this into three, right, trying to keep it, kind of broad and inclusive, right? There's global intelligence. There's intelligence about your vertical, your industry. It could also be about your region. That's another view there. And then you have intelligence about you, your specific company. And the further you move down on this inverted triangle, right, the more expensive that it gets, right? There's global intelligence that could be what we're seeing across the global landscape. There's certainly going to be targeting there that's relevant to your organization, but a lot of folks are looking at that. It may not have as much value. This is where the accuracy piece comes in, and actually testing stuff out to kind of see how relevant it is to your organization. And then you drill down. Here's something that's specific to your industry, to your region of the world, and then ultimately at the bottom specific to your organization. Now this can get quite expensive, right? Some of the vendors that I'm working with now, right, they're going out and they're crawling based on keywords and tags and collecting information in. Once again, as I said a little bit earlier, there's not just one vendor that can answer all of your intel needs, but there's this kind of cost that goes down. The more information that you want, the more relevant it's going to be to you. There's a high potential that cost is going to increase. And a couple examples for relevancy, right? And I've mentioned process controllers lately. I guess it's probably because I'm doing some enterprise consulting in this particular area, and I've written some research on SCADA security. But are they collecting information against attacks against this and then providing it to you? Virtual machines, not virtual machines, honeypots, things like that. Also on medical devices. When I was a practitioner, I worked at a university that had a health component to it. And so we had tons of this stuff. Literally, it was environment with an NT4 server. We couldn't touch it. We couldn't scan it. We couldn't do anything to it. It would be nice to know the threats that were coming up there so we could adjust our controls or just block them outright. When it comes to relevancy, I think the question that I asked there is, how is this relevant to my organization? What are you doing? Once again, this goes back to the verticals piece, right? How many of my types of customers are you using? What is their experience like? You're going to have to understand the vendor's collection, their intelligence requirements, and kind of distill what that relevancy means to you. But ultimately, for a lot of this stuff, the proof is in the pudding. You've got to have a test and see what it looks like in your environment. Next up is a very obvious yet challenging component for many folks is it's got to be timely. One of the examples that I have here, and if you're any banking customers that have been under the DDoS stuff, although from a bank perspective that has gone down a little bit. Now it's probably more on the gaming side that they're seeing the DDoS stuff. But right, I talk to customers that are getting infrastructure that they would want to block, attack infrastructure, and they're getting lists of IPs, 10, 15,000 is what they have. Is this up to date? How relevant is it? When can I expire it? That goes back to even if you think about how we've traditionally done some intel, right, where you're getting an email from CERT or you're in InfraGard and you're getting some type of indicators there, right? How long are these valid for? Are they still valid, right? It's a big challenge for organizations as they get overwhelmed. And the other piece that's happening, and this goes back to the integration, I'm doing an evaluation of cloud-based web gateways, so basically a Zscaler or a Blue Coat in the cloud. But across the technologies, right, they weren't really built to consume threat intelligence. So you could easily do a denial of service trying to dynamically update a watch list on a firewall or on a proxy. So the vendors themselves on the detective and preventive side need to do a better job of consuming this intelligence in a way that's efficient, doesn't take the box down, especially if it's something that's doing inline services. Big problem there. Big opportunity for vendors as well. So when we look at this, some of the things that I'll ask the vendors here is how frequently is your intelligence updated? I've got a range of, I won't steal the thunder of my pending research, but this was one of the questions I was working with vendors on, and we actually have some follow-up conversations that we're going to have as well. Minutes, hours, real time, weeks. Tell me about this. How relevant and timely is this for my customers to put into their environments? And then how do they expire, right? When do you retire stuff? What's the half-life on what your stuff is? It's a really important question. Once again, we're really hot on threat indicators right now, or indicators of compromise. They're signatures, and we know how well signatures worked in IDS. Now, I had custom implementation of Snort at the university that I worked at. That was our hunting box. We only use signatures for targeted attacks against our organization, that sort of stuff. So we had a very surgical use of signatures, and we've got to be careful here is that, there's a lot of hype around threat indicators. There's more than just threat indicators out there, and we've got to be able to manage those. And I'm going to actually be covering on that in that, once again, promoting research, or maybe over-promoting research on the platforms for analysis of this stuff. So next up is understanding their collection capability. So this kind of goes back, I guess this is kind of the aggregate of a lot of these here. It kind of builds into the collection of what's going on. Now this is difficult to sometimes get the information from some of the providers that are out there. There's sources and methods involved here that vendors obviously don't want to give up because they have an ability to collect some information, and perhaps the adversaries aren't aware of that, so they don't want to give it up. Some of the common ways that Intel providers are collecting information is through ISP peering, honeypots, honeynets, monitoring Tor exit nodes, web crawlers. That's kind of been the traditional thing that we've seen from the URL filtering days, come back for all the crawlers that those companies were doing. Incident response engagements and what they're collecting from their hands on the ground, boots on the ground, and then product footprint, right? So for vendors that have lighthouse boxes reporting back in. There's a number of different things here, and I think it becomes really important to understand this. I did a blog about 2.5 years ago called My Threat Intelligence Can Beat Up Your Threat Intelligence, and where you were seeing vendors, you could swap out the vendor's logo for what their capabilities were here. So many emails, so many web requests. But it is important to understand this stuff, and it's important to dig deeper. And as the vendors are going into more opportunities, they're going to have to expose more and more of this. But ultimately, they could have the greatest deck slide on what their collection capabilities are. When you're demoing it, that's where you need to go. But you can use collection to understand and come up with a short list of folks that you might look at. Okay, so let's tap our brakes. I'm actually writing about this. I just submitted for editing from my boss. I'm doing a piece on adversary intelligence right now. So I did this actionable intelligence piece that came out 6 weeks ago. I'm doing one now on adversary intelligence, and one of the points that I make in that is, before you're going out and spending money on some third party, what are you doing internally? You've got to take advantage of what you've got in your own incidents. You're not going to get anything more relevant than what's actually happening to your organization and the targets you have. So you need to be building dossiers on these intrusions, the malware technical indicators that you're getting, the infrastructure, information about the malware, when you're getting attacked, time of day, those sort of stuff. So we need to do that. We don't want to go rush to buy an external solution if we don't have something already going on the inside of our organization. I call it expense and depth. I did some research early in the year called Target Attack Hierarchy of Needs, and one of the concepts in there is expense and depth. Instead of defense in depth, it's expense in depth. We just kind of buy the latest and greatest silver bullet, whatever it is. These days, threat intelligence has emerged as the next one there. And the sad thing is there's a lot of value in threat intelligence, so I don't want to minimize that. And the marketing buzzword sometimes just kind of makes us yawn and get beat down by it. But my main point here is you need to be doing this on the inside. Once again, I had that slide from before, right? When you complement this with the external guys who have a much wider net, you get a nice inside and outside perspective, right? We need to balance these. It's not going to be one, it's not going to be the other. In fact, I don't think you should hyper-focus on either. We need the internal perspective. We need the outside and try to balance it pretty evenly. To go into, Intel buzzword bingo, right? Fusion would be what you would talk about here. fusing those two perspectives together. This is a little bit of a preview of the threat intel market overview that I'm working on. Some of the high-level, early kind of scratch paper ideas I have on the market, and I won't necessarily read all of these. It might be useful to go back and look at. But when I look at the landscape, you've got a number of different types of providers that are out there. You've got ones that are doing open source intelligence, so OSINT collection. You've got the human intelligence side, HUMINT, which different vendors can offer different, capabilities. Here's where you might have, the sock puppets, right? Where people are developing personas and forums, looking at criminal undergrounds, looking at hacktivists, and giving you information, right? Some vendors actually do have, not that they're the CIA, right, but they do have human resources in regions that can go and do observation on adversaries and things of that nature. Quite expensive there. You would be at the top of the maturity level when you're utilizing a service or a capability like that. As you kind of go on, you've got technical intelligence. This is stuff about malware, the malcode analysis, some of the, massive binary analysis coming out there. Of course, command and control, DNS, IP address, registrars, ASNs, a lot of that stuff there, stuff that's coming out bad. Tactical and operational in nature, but it's good for the day-to-day operations, and you can tie it back to adversary groups. Which then ties into the adversary intelligence, which is what I'm currently writing about right now, right? This is all about capabilities, intent, motivations, and as I mentioned there, technical intel is a component of that. And then finally, I have the strategic intelligence, where you have some vendors that are very much at the strategic level, looking at trends, some of it from OSINT, some of it from their own analysts, looking at, 5 years from now, this is what healthcare targeting is going to look like, things of that nature. So that's kind of a preview of that particular research. When it comes to, recommendations that I have, right, let's go back to that stop sign, right? You got to start on the inside. There's nothing that's more relevant than actually what's happening in your own organization. The other piece, right, is don't buy something if you don't have the ability to act on it. I'll use an analogy on the endpoint stuff, right? Maybe you're getting a lot of information on, TCP the attackers are using, and you want to go out and look at your endpoints to see if it's being done, but you don't have an endpoint solution that's capable of doing that. Should you really pay for something that you can't act on? Once again, can you integrate it into your controls, be it a detective or preventive control? And this is where, prevention is not dead. We're going to be preventing known bad, and this almost in many ways is our kind of reputational IP file domain name blacklisting, essentially, right, where we're trying to do that in real time and go back to the timely component. That's going to be there. But then you've also kind of got the predictive prevention as well, based on the age of this particular, when was this domain name registered, what ASN is this coming out. We've seen historically bad information here. Let's just outright block it. Predictive prevention is also going to continue to expand. And then the last is, and I get this a lot, this is really, really important, is you need to be able to demonstrate the value of this. I have customers, like I said, it's budget time, and I had this last year and the year before, that have gone out in some cases and spent millions of dollars on a program. Maybe one or two providers, well, certainly more than one, but they'll usually start off with one. They're bringing in staff. There's a big trend right now to bring people out of the intel community, the cyber warfare community coming out of the military. Bring them in 7 figures easily, multiple 7 figures. Better be able to show the return on that investment. From a tactical perspective, are you trending down? Is your time to, detection, containment, remediation going down? Think about metrics, and I've got that in a couple pieces of research. We could have a follow-up conversation there, but think about that, because 1 year after you get this money, you better be able to show that it worked. Otherwise, you may see that money go away. And then the last thing I would say, I've mentioned research a couple times here. If you don't have to be a Forrester client to get research from me. If you follow me on Twitter or you follow my blog, when I'm doing new research, I'll say, hey guys, I'm looking for research interviews. We can do an hour-long or an hour-ish long research interview, completely confidential. I never mention sources or anything like that. Not in our space. We're all security guys, so we're kind of paranoid as it is. And I'll give you that research. So currently I'm doing a lot of research on, obviously, threat intelligence. Incident response stuff is queued up. So there'll be more of that probably for the next 3 or 4 quarters. So if that's something you might be interested in, just follow me on Twitter and let me know. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Rick. Good presentation. I just want to talk a little bit about Norse. I've got about 5 slides here. Please don't forget, if you have questions, please put them in the questions. Click the questions button there at the top and post those over. I did want to address one of them just because Rick talked about it, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. One of the questions was, what is a Tor node? And what we're talking about there is an anonymous proxy. Tor is an acronym for the Onion router. If you've heard of the Silk Road thing that got taken down a year ago, where you could buy and sell drugs and hits on people and all kinds of crazy stuff like that, that was part of that was hidden in the Tor network, and the purpose of it is to kind of hide your tracks. So that's what a Tor node is. So again, if you have more questions, please click the questions button, and we'll talk about them after my part here. So if you look down in the audience message, I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. I just sent out a URL, map.ipviking.com. Those of you who haven't seen that, that's a live attack map of our less than 1% of all the data that we're seeing on our network of honeypots, dark sensors, crawlers, that sort of thing. Basically, our threat intelligence gathering network. So you can pull that up in your browser and check that out. It's pretty cool. But what we're trying to show there is that it's a little bit freaky about how much and how many attacks are happening at any given time. We're also trying to show the global nature of our intelligence gathering network because we think that's one of our biggest differentiators. But our goal is basically to equip organizations with solutions to stop emerging threats beyond their perimeter before they reach the network. And we'll talk about that more on the next slide. But that's really what we're trying to do is prevent things before they get to the network, before they become breaches, kind of an over-the-horizon view. So just a little bit more about that. Norse is focused on bad traffic. So we're looking at bots, anonymous proxies, compromised web servers, P2P networks, all kinds of places where bad actors operate, where hackers post the spoils of their hacks, all this sort of thing. And that's a little bit different from the way a lot of existing security vendors look, which is to use nodes on their customer networks to gather threat intelligence, which is certainly useful. There's definitely some use there, but they're looking inside the networks, whereas Norse is looking everywhere else outside the networks, into the regular internet plus all the dark nets where the bad actors operate. So that's really our focus, and we call that organic intelligence because we're not gathering it from other people. We're finding it out there on the internet, and which means we can use all of it, because a lot of the vendors that use their customers' data, they can't use all of it. It's got to be anonymized, and they can't. They're not able to utilize all of it. So a little bit about our products. So we have, like I said, we have this very large intelligence network. We process over 130 terabytes of data a day that goes into our Norse dark matter platform, which is the analysis platform. One interesting thing is that within 5 seconds of us seeing anything bad on our network, so anytime something interacts with us in a negative way, a malicious way, within 5 seconds it's available through our APIs to our customers. So when Rick talked about timeliness, you can't get much more timely than that. It's virtually instant. So you want to be able to take action as soon as possible, make sure it's actionable intelligence, as Rick was talking about. No Terry tape, please. But that's what we do, is we provide it so that our customers can then include it in their existing security solutions, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But we deliver this intelligence once it's analyzed in 3 different methods. We'll start down at the bottom with one of our products called Darklist, and this is basically a list of the top 3 to 5 million worst IPs on the internet, with a little bit of context in them, such as geolocation and things like that. So we score every IP that we see 0 to 100. So in that Darklist, you'll be able to see the top 3 to 5 million highest risk IPs with a score, where it's located in the world, and that sort of thing. And typically that's used for inclusion in a SIM, integration in a SIM or an IPS, things like that. And I actually have a use case for that on a couple slides here. The next product is called Dark Viking, which is also an API-based solution. It's very transactional, so instead of, as opposed to Darklist, which is a list of IPs, Dark Viking works just one IP at a time. So if you can imagine, during a financial transaction, it could automatically submit an IP to Dark Viking, and then Dark Viking would return all the information that we know about that IP address. History of up to 5 years of what the things we've seen on it, the score, of course, geolocation, and much more. And then finally, at Black Hat this year, just about a month and a half ago, we announced our first appliance we call Darkwatch, and it's really the first appliance specifically designed to detect and defend against the new threats emerging from the dark nets and the rest of the internet. So in real words, basically what it does is it sits out on your network as a customer, and then when people either click on URLs or try to visit URLs or IPs that may be malicious, that's outgoing, then what it'll do is it'll try to match those IPs and URLs to the dark list that's built in, and then we'll keep people from getting malware on those systems by blocking those things. You can also just report on them as well. So those are basically the way we deliver that intelligence that we're gathering in those 3 ways. One of the other things that Rick talked about was being integrated. That's something we believe strongly in. I think all of these partners have been this year, so we've been working really hard to add partners, and I expect to add 5 or 6 more before the end of the year. I do want to cherry pick a couple of these because we've got a lot of different types of integration. So Splunk, as Rick mentioned, we're integrated actually directly into enterprise security, Splunk for enterprise security, and we also have our own Splunk app. We're similarly integrated with Logarithm and HP ArcSight. We've got a few more of those in the works, McAfee, Nitro. SecureAuth is one of the ones that we've recently done. It's a 2-factor authentication integration. And then we're also in a couple of the new threat sharing services that are out there, HP Threat Central and Checkpoint's Threat Cloud and Telestore. So we're really looking to get our intelligence into your existing solutions so we can make those solutions smarter, and then through the sharing services to make it easier to get to. Now, for my last slide, I just want to go through one of the more prevalent use cases that you see. This is actually using 2 of our solutions, and this is just one of the many use cases. Please contact us if you'd like to hear about more of these, because we have a bunch we can go through. But here's just one that we see quite a few of our customers doing. What they'll do is they'll import the dark list into their SIM, and you can do that automatically. Even if it's a SIM that we don't support already, you can usually use our API to have it done automatically. It's pretty simple. We have code samples, lots of documentation, so it's designed to be very easy to use. And then when an attacker tries to get into the organization, either using a compromised host or coming from a Tor exit node or botnet or something like that, we'll see that security event in your SIM, and you'll be able to connect it to, automatically it will connect to the IP address from the outside that we show. So instead of it just saying, there's somebody coming in from a certain IP address, it'll actually show that, yes, there is somebody coming in, but that IP address is a very high score from Norse, maybe it's 100, and their location is in Romania, and that might be a red flag right there. So once you see that, then you can actually right-click on that particular IP. It'll do a call out to our Dark Viking product, which will bring back all the context for that IP, such as the up to 5 years of history. Has there been any malware on it, botnets, those sort of things. So you can really do some quick instant response and take action. preventing that attacker from doing more damage. So that's, like I said, that's probably the most prevalent use case. Of course, with the addition of our DarkWatch appliance, there's also an outgoing blocking use case as well. But I just wanted to focus on one for now. So that is all of the slides I have. I want to thank everybody. Let me just, again, if you have any questions, click the questions button at the top. Looks like you have a few, so let's get to some of those. One of the questions, can I get a copy of the slides? You can if you shoot me an email there on the slide. Then I will be happy to send you those in PDF format. Also want to remind everybody that the recording of this webinar will be ready right here on our website in really just a few minutes after this is over. It happens pretty quickly. Next question, I think I might have just answered it, but let me make sure. The question was, how far can I drill down to the attack in your network? With the Dark Viking product, which is the kind of the query and IP product or URL, we can drill all the way down, so you can get every single bit of information that we know there. That includes any information we learn through passive DNS about malware domains, any malware that's ever been on that IP, anytime that IP's ever been part of a botnet or a Tor exit node or done anything malicious. Will be there, and we keep track of that over time. We have very strong geolocation capabilities, so we can usually get to within 5 feet of a terrestrial or non-mobile IP if we have enough communication between us and that particular IP. So all kinds of information there, and we'll be happy to show it to you if you'd like to get a quick demo. Just on our website, there's a request a demo button that you can click, and we can do that. Let's see. How do you deal with URLs that are behind a CDN or IPs that are on multi-home systems? That's a great question, and we actually keep track of those as well, and we'll identify them as such. Next question, very good question. How does your appliance work in conjunction with other network security solutions like next generation firewalls, IPSs, IDS, etc.? Is it a replacement for any of those devices? And that's a really good question that we get quite a bit. It's not a replacement for those. It's very complementary. If you think about a next generation firewall, for example, they do quite a bit more than just blocking outgoing traffic or even incoming traffic. They've got whitelisting capabilities, all sorts of things that are built in there, and that's not what we do, right? We're focused on protecting the network against bad things. So there's a little bit of overlap there, but we look at it much more as a complementary solution and you want to have both, and that's why we're working with so many of those our partners that make a lot of the things that you just listed there in your question.
I think I'll add on to that a little bit, Jeff, too. I think the trend that we're going to continue to see, this example use case here is getting into more and more controls, not just network controls, but also endpoint controls. Once again, as the vendor community knows that there needs to be more integration in, and we really want to, once again, break down that silo of I can only use vendor X Intel and vendor X, right? We're trying to flatten that. Jeff mentioned a couple of the Intel sharing partnerships that have emerged over the summer. I think within the next, by the end of the year, maybe into Q1, every vendor is going to be participating in some type of Intel sharing arrangement. Now, I think you got to dig deeper and find out what that means. Is it just marketing, or is there an actual use case? This kind of goes back to what I was saying before about you got to test this stuff out. What are the use cases? Mr. Vendor, show me the use cases that this helps you with. Let's get past the marketing kind of BS that's going on, and let's see how you're going to help me reduce friction in my environment and respond to the attackers faster, or just straight up block them.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Rick. Let's see, we got one more question. What is your false positive rate, and how long is your support response to resolve suspected false positives? That's probably the hardest question you'll be asked on a webinar, but I actually want to use another use case to kind of talk about how to explain the answer. So one of our customers is actually using the dark list that we talked about, the top 3 to 5 million worst IPs, in an IPS that's on the outside of their network. So before the firewall, they have an IPS, and what they do is they take all the IPs that have a score of 89 and above, and put those in their IPS and block them outright. And you can imagine if we had false positives of any percentage, that wouldn't be possible, right? Because you'd be blocking all kinds of sites that you don't want to block. But the way Norse scores work, we actually age them out very quickly. So if we see that you have, for example, you've got malware on your IP, you're going to get a score of 100, right? That's just where it is. It's bad. But if we don't see that IP interact with any of our systems, for say a 24 to 48 hour period, the score is going to go way down really quickly because we want to age it out very quickly, because we know if we see something that's bad, we're going to have more interaction with it if it doesn't get fixed or it doesn't go off the internet. So if we don't see it, then we think that IP is either no longer accessible or it's been remediated or something like that. So that is one of the ways that we keep our false positive rate extremely low. But this particular customer, they've been blocking those high score IPs for over 6 months now, and the only thing that they've even called a false positive was, for example, when one day the NBC.com site was loading very slow, and they got a call from their upper management, and they looked into it, and it was because Norse was blocking an iframe on their site that was actually serving malware. So not even really a false positive, right? We were blocking the malware, but it just caused the site to load pretty slow. So while we can't say we have a 0% false positive rate, so far our experience in the real world has been very, very good.
I think, let me add one thing on a little different spin on that too, right? There's the false positives, but then there's also the legitimate alerts. And in the broader context in this conversation, right, vendors, we'll talk a lot about low false positive rates, but how do you help me if I'm overwhelmed with legitimate alerts? And what this could mean in this scenario, right, if Norse is feeding to a security control, what does that control? This goes back to what I said earlier. Their ability to ingest IPs, domains, hashes, if it's maybe on the endpoint, right? There's a finite window or a finite amount of information that we could feed them. So that's where I think the relevancy and what's most important that needs to get stopped first. If I have 15 things to block and I only can block 2 of them, let's make sure that those are the highest threats to my organization. And we're kind of emerging here. This is where we're headed, not necessarily where we are for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, exactly. And we're certainly working on that as well. Just one more question, and then we'll wrap up. In addition to IPs, do you have intelligence on URLs, files, application, and malware? And yes, we do. IPs, and we've added URLs in about February of this year, so we've got lots of URL information as well. And we're actually starting to do some intelligence on what we call pre-attack malware, where we see some malware out there in the wild before it's actually released. With some of our crawlers and things like that, we'll actually see it with debug code in it, sometimes with the author's name in it, believe it or not, before it actually gets released. So truly proactive, predictive, looking over the horizon. So we do have that. So with that, we're a couple minutes over. I wanted to really thank everybody for coming today. If you have any more questions, feel free to email me there. And I wanted to thank Rick again. And everybody, have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.